So welcome to another episode of Ask the Growbot. I'm Jesse Porter with GrowGlide, Director of Cultivation and Content Creation, joined per usual by Will Gonzalez, Director of Marketing and Creative Tech, also the Growbot Wrangler for this episode. And per usual, we brought on a great guest. This one is Jay Larkins from Dry Flower. If you don't know Jay from Dry Flower, he has a hang harvest system that I think is one of the best in the industry, built from the game, by the game, through experience. Personally, I've known Jay for quite a while now. We worked on some big projects, moving tons of outdoor grown cannabis indoor and trying to cure it up appropriately. We've dove into a number of different topics, which hopefully we can unpack a little bit together here and really just talk about curing and sizing and some rules of thumb that we use. But I'll say this about Jay. Out of everyone I know in this industry, when it comes to curing, he has the most on the ground, hands-on experience. This isn't theoretical BS. This isn't talking about what we should do. It's about talking what he has done year in, year out to help people make more money curing cannabis successfully. So that said, Jay, I'm gonna toss it to you. Do a little intro, man. Tell us about yourself. Tell us about Dry Flower. If you want to talk about green juice and hot yoga, we're down for that too, brother. But tell us about you and your solution and you know why we're always talking to you, man.
Hey, Jesse, thanks for having me on, man. Great to see you again, as always, Will. Appreciate the hospitality, you guys. What a kind introduction. Yeah, I mean, I've been in the weed game most of my life, over 30 years hustling, smoking, living it. And yeah, over that time, I've developed the hang harvesting system. More recently, over the last 4 or 5 years, really fine-tuned it and brought it to market in just a really presentable, palatable fashion that is very understandable when people see it. It's very easy to understand. There's a lot of nuances to it that are not straightforward. But yeah, it's been a evolutionary process with the system through boots on the ground, action. It's trying it, testing it, using it, R&Ding it, and then fine tuning it. And really, it's lifelong, the culmination of my life's work in the weed game, to be honest. So yeah, it's a great product, and just love what I'm doing these days, and happy to be here. So
thanks, man. Anyone who uses your product swears by the labor reduction, the reduction in touches, the fact that it seems simple, works great every time, is predictable and easy to use, and scales incredibly well, man. But that said, that's what we're here to talk about, right? Commercial curing, drying at scale, which has its challenges. It's a little bit different than the clothes hangers we used back in the day to dry stuff from a tent. At scale, we really need SOPs and the tools to be consistent. So that said, let's throw a question at the Growbot and see what it has to say. I think first off, let's say, what are the most important things to consider when you design a dry cure space for commercial cannabis cultivation? Obviously, my experience working with HVAC led me to you, Jay, talking about designing these facilities, building them the right way, and understanding how to get predictable results. I mean, to be honest, right? Curing is still a little bit of an unknown. We know about water activity and moisture content, but how do we really control thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of cannabis loaded into a space without rotting it out? So curious to see what the Growbot has to say. Are we using 4.0 this time?
Yeah, we are. Yes, we're gonna get hopefully some good answers here. So I asked it, I want you to act as an expert in cannabis curing and cultivation. And so what are the most important things to consider when you design a dry cure space for cannabis cultivation? Temperature control.
So obviously everyone's got their particular temperature and humidity set points. I think that's something we might unpack a little bit more in a more granular question about itineraries. Air circulation, right? That's one that I really leaned into you historically, Jay. It's not so much what are the velocities and how much air and how do we filter the air coming into the curing space. It's about predictably putting these wet plants into the facility, into these rooms with the appropriate spacing to allow for airflow. So we know air circulation is important, but how do we actually achieve it? For me, as an HVAC guy designing supply return configurations and where that air comes in, it was like, let's talk to Jay about where the weed's actually going to hang, where the avenues for airflow are. But I'd love to hear, your take on this. It's really blowing this up a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm reading these answers off. Interesting. Yeah. Some of them might throw out the window, like odor control these days. I guess it depends on where you are. That might be a consideration. Yeah, I think, airflow is, there's two aspects when it comes to knocking down or harvesting. It's like you've got the process of getting it cut and hung into the space and uniformity and what that looks like. And then completely separate from that, but somewhat integrated, is the environment itself, the atmosphere, right? So they're two separate beasts that are really important. Both are very, very important. Which one's more important? 100% the atmosphere, because it doesn't matter how you hang it, doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter how much or how little is in the space. If you don't have proper atmospheric conditions, you're going to mold. And I've seen single branches hanging, just rotting, molding, not because there was too much weed in the space, rather there was no airflow, right? There was no exhausting the room or keeping the room to the proper atmosphere. So, the atmosphere is the most important in my opinion, but that almost goes without saying. Everybody kind of knows that and has to figure that out. And most people have that dialed in and have had that dialed in for, weeks and months and years. But the hanging aspect of it is really what is equally important, and what that process looks like going from the garden, from the grow room into that dry space, right? There's, the age-old method is like, I say age-old, maybe the past 10 years, cut it into totes, bring those totes to your dry room, go up on ladders and hang it on a net, right? And that's mostly the process. But in that process, there's a lot of damage to the flower. You've got damage going into a tote. You've got damage when the material stays in a tote for too long and it starts perspiring, starts sweating in the tote, right? You've got material getting unhung off of nets, just brittle, ripping apart, right? So there's a lot of damage in the age-old process, the industry standard up to this point. So
yeah, you get contamination in the tote. It requires more touches. Everything falls off the net. It's not secure. And I think you nailed it, right? I'm with you here preaching the environmental control angle and understanding your environmental itineraries. But the truth is that your hang harvesting system allows for the environmental controls to effectively hit every bud the same way, versus just that front wall of weed that we have, or just the back, depending on where the supply returns are. Like, you allow for people that supply true mechanical solutions, specific and purpose-built for curing, to achieve success throughout, again, thousands and thousands of pounds hanging in one place.
Yeah. Traditionally with the nets, you've got like just a wall of net of material, right? And then maybe a foot or 18 inches, maybe 2 feet, and then another wall, right? So, we've already gone over the semantics of going up and down and trashing the weed like that. But really, like the airflow, you're unless you have a fan down every row, unless you're distributing air down every row, and you've got 30 or 40 rows of nets, depending on the size of the facility, it's really, you're not getting that proper airflow. You're not circulating properly. With our system, with the hang harvesting system, we're not only spacing them on the fly as needed, right? So we don't have fixed nets overhead and we're set at these spaces. Rather, we can adjust the spacing of the hangers as needed when we're filling up the space. And equally, we've got vertical spacing, exact spacing, so that there's going to be a gap between the vertical levels. So, the nets, you've got rows this way, but with our system, we can space it how we want side to side. And then we've also got gaps vertically to allow that ambient flow to stay consistent throughout the upper and lower and side to side. So it's really about the SOPs, of proper knockdown, making branches consistent sizing, so that when you get those hangers full with the hang harvesting system, you're going to go into the room and know exactly what's going to fit in the space and how it's going to fit in the space. And when it comes to the, back to the beginning question, like what's most important? Well, it's definitely, when building a dry room, is like, how much are you trying to get into the space, right? What are your goals? What's your target? Are you trying to fill up a 20,000 square foot warehouse with as much as you possibly can because you're knocking down 20 acres? Or do you have a 1,000 square foot grow room and you've got a 1,000 square foot dry room, right? So we need to understand how much we actually want to fit into the space so that we can hit the target and be efficient on the front end with our cost of the system, right? We don't want to buy twice as much equipment as we need. And likewise, we don't want to set up and then find out we only have half as much equipment as we need to knock down. And now we need, it's harvest day and we've only got half the equipment, right? So super important first off is to know, how much are you targeting? What are you trying to accomplish here? From there, once we have that number, or you have that number, then we look at the atmosphere and we start to run those calculations to, okay, if we're going to put in 10,000 wet pounds into this space and we have this much room, what does that look like as far as HVAC system? How much tonnage do we need to accomplish this? All right.
Yeah, dude, I think, you're a great person to talk to about this. Like, obviously, Will should ask this question, like, what's the best approach to airflow during cannabis curing? But I'm curious to see what it has to say about this. The other thing is, I've talked to you about this before too, of that ratio. And I think this is the follow-up question to this. You're talking about how much weed we're going to get into this space. And it's a little bit of a misnomer, right? Sometimes I know how much I'm going to yield, but I know the back end of the sausage machine, 55 grams a square foot, a couple pounds light, whatever it is. I don't necessarily know the wet weight. So I think you've really helped this industry illustrate that back and forth rule of thumb of what is the wet weight conversion to dry rate? How much, if I know how much dry weight I'm expecting, how much wet weight does that really look like from a load-in perspective? And how do you marry those two numbers? And I think that's the follow-up question I want to get to this airflow. Obviously, HVAC, supply return configurations, where are the fans going to be? Where are you pulling the air from? How often do you cycle the space? How does the air move through? Specifically, I've used your hang drying system to do CFD modeling in the cannabis cultivation and curing spaces, right? Like cultivation, everyone knows CFD modeling is going to help you figure out where the air flows, but curing just as important, right?
Yeah.
I want to prevent dead spaces and eddies. I want to get it flowing through. I want to know how much I can exchange that whole room, which is, again, what you spoke to, 3, ventilation, so you don't get that single cola rotting and then spreading, sporulating throughout the whole facility.
Yeah, moving air is like I said, moving air is the most important. Period. End of story. You've got to circulate air. Conversion rates, getting that proper amount in there. We use a 10-to-1 ratio at Dry Flower. That means if you're putting 10 wet pounds, if you're hanging up 10 wet pounds, once you dry it, you bucket, you trim it, you should have a pound in the bag. If you're crushing,
Ask
you
the
might
Growbot, Will.
I mean, that's
the Growbot, because I know Jay has transformed this industry on really understanding that 10-to-1 ratio, right? And sometimes it can be a little bit cultivar dependent, depending on what happened in the field, watering rates, and things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Dude, you need to do that math, the number's not in a book, dude. Like you can't look that up.
Well, it's in 4-to-1 or 5-to-1.
4-to-1 or 5-to-1. You're wrong. That's why people are doing the math wrong.
Yeah. So, but again, that wet to dry, that's a misnomer there, because they're talking it. They dried it and now it was wet. They dried it and now what do they have? But what we're doing is we're going into it. We want to know finished product. We don't want to know how much trim we fucking have. We don't want to know how much stem we have. We want to know how much are we anticipating getting in the bag to the market, right? And so that 10-to-1 is, man, to be honest, I feel pretty money on that number. I've run it for years. Hang on, sorry guys, my beautiful daughter calling. Yeah, that number, I mean, it's been so consistent. When I suss out clients and I get them set up and they have expectations. They want to knock down 100 pounds. They want to knock down 500 pounds. That number that we use is pretty spot on. I think that we hit our target. I mean,
and why is it so important, right? Like
I haven't heard
bad news
with our conversion. Right. So, no news is good news. And by my own experience, I got that 10-to-1. When I crushed it, I wouldn't even get not 10-to-2. Like you're not going 10 pounds down to 2 in the bag. Maybe 1.5. 1.5 was crushing for me. I don't think I ever got that, that, because that would be, 5-to-1. I never hit that ratio. 10-to-1 is like, man, it's money. It just is, it just is what it just averages out that way.
And the reason why it's so critical, right, is like we talk to engineers all the time trying to design these facilities for future proofing and long-term success. And we both know curing is a misunderstood science at best, and there's a lot of art involved. But when it comes to sizing the HVAC, that's the number we need. We need to know the wet weight in order to know how much dehumidification performance we need at what temperatures over what itinerary and what time in order to effectively dry and cure this product. HVAC system, hugely important, but how do we size that? We need to size it off of wet weight in and time and temperature. And without your input, we're sizing 3 to run, and we're always getting the wrong performance need, and we're needing to bring in supplemental airflow and hope for the best.
Well, you know what, you said it a second ago, it's art. And so even the finest dry rooms, like the finest atmospheric controls, everything fine, top, everything butter, there's still the human factor, and there's other considerations that will make it inconsistent every single time. How fast did you get it in? How chunky is it? How many, there's too many considerations for it to be set it and forget it. It's just not like that. It's an art. It really is an art. You can have all the tools, but it's not set it and forget it. It's just like any grow facility. You can put timers on, you can have everything on irrigation, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. And there's so many factors that keep it from being exactly the same flower you grew last time. It's just almost never is. There's just, and mostly the grower's only going to notice that, but there's so many, so many nuances that it's art, man. The dry room is an art. There's no perfect dry room. I mean, there's dry rooms with conditions and considerations. And if you have your thumb on the pulse, then you understand all those considerations, and you understand the airflow, and you know where the dead pockets are, and you know why they're dead there and when they're dead there. It's because you just filled it up there, or you got stuff drying there, or whatever it is. But having your thumb on the pulse and really cultivating that art is a fine quality to have as a grower.
Right. Using the HVAC system, using the fans, using the tools you
those
have.
are just tools.
We'll ask this. I got another question, right? What's the best environmental itinerary for curing cannabis over a 12-day period? And I think I'm setting what's the best environmental itinerary for curing cannabis over a 12-day period? I'm setting the GrowBot up for failure here because I'm with you, Jay. It's art, right?
Totally. It's an art.
We can have all the sensors in the space. We can have adherence to set point. We can have different temperatures and humidities over the first 3 days versus the last 10 days. We can have moisture content meters, water activity meters, and all these tools that build an SOP. And we can still end up with crappy weed at the end of the day if you don't effectively know how to manage the process day by day, right?
All right, here we go.
I like that the first 3 days are of utmost importance. That genuinely speaks to rot, right? We need to have a warm enough temperature effectively over the first 3 days to migrate enough moisture out of the space to get below a 0.8 water activity so we don't get botrytis and bud rot. But after that, the intermediate drying phase is where the art really comes into play. Now, how fast do we want the moisture to move to break down sugars and starches and play with the cannabis isotherm? That's an unknown. You ask PhDs that study this field, they don't have the answer either. They'll tell you how to avoid certain reactions, but the goal is to have great smoke, and great smoke falls without outside of that definition,
Yeah. I mean, this is interesting stuff, day 4 to day 7, what it's saying. It's, again, going in, that first day, first 3 days myself, I'm always at max dehu. I'm cranking, I want to lock out that any botrytis. I want to lock that out right away. Then when we get the moisture content down, I can wait plenty of time, longer the better.
Slow down the process, right?
But, for selling potatoes, you got to crank those things out. You might only need 7 days to get it. You got to get it down. You got to get it bucked and trimmed and out the door. But eating potatoes, hang it for a month. Leave it. You know what I mean? Like, it's different.
It
depends on that. There's too many considerations. What are you doing? What are you harvesting for? What's your process? What's the end result?
100%.
Potatoes are different. Eating potatoes, you never cut and put into a tote, not even for 5 minutes. Like eating potatoes, you cut it, hang it, don't touch it. Leave it. Take your time. enjoy it. You're going to smoke it every bit. So you want the, not only the smoke, but, the less you're touching it and throwing it in totes, when you actually get down to that trim process and you hand trim it, you're going to have something aesthetically so much more pleasing to look at because it has no press, right? It still has the full features of when it was a flower, just kind of shrunk up and dried. So, perfect world, it's all eating potatoes, but that's not reality. That's not economical.
I love that term, eating potatoes versus selling potatoes, because with an eating potato, you're trying to protect every single trichrome, every single monoterpene. You want greedily, you're chasing it.
Absolutely.
But number two, the second part here, this 4 to 7 intermediate drying phase is interesting to me, right? Because coming from that HVAC world, I know that I don't have the money when I build a facility to put enough HVAC in there to achieve 60-45. I mean, we're talking about a massive amount of tonnage in a cold room with specific purpose-built equipment. Most of the time, most people can't hit this mark. They might put it on their hygrometer. They might set their temperature and humidity to try to achieve this, but actually achieving these numbers, incredibly difficult with a ton of energy costs, right? So I'm with you. It's like there's a balance of art, knowing what to expect, being in this place before, right? And then also knowing the limitations of your mechanical solutions, right?
Yeah. Going into these large facilities, especially, I see people using HVAC for like the first couple 2-3 days. They're trying to bring the humidity down when really all they need is just to exhaust the whole space and bring in fresh air from outside that's already lower humidity than what they're doing. It's like it never ceases to amaze me, the energy waste of trying to condition the air in a room when you could just pull air in from the outside and exhaust the whole room at a fraction of the cost, at least for the first couple days, right? Until you can get that ambient mixture of what it is outside, then use your controls to like start to lock it down, lock it in.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fear-based response, where people are just like, hey, they want to blame the HVAC versus blaming their own ignorance or inability to achieve the goals that they have set forth, right? So blame the mechanical solution, blame the employees, blame the SOPs. And I think that's something that you've really changed about the curing process too. And maybe we should ask that, like, I'd love to hear the Growbot talk to us about what are the best SOPs for curing, right? Because I think what you've done with your solution, the hang harvesting system, has basically streamlined the SOPs from when you cut to how you hang, to how you get it into the room, to how you get it out of the room, to how you get it to the next phase of post-harvest processing.
Yeah, the efficiency is ridiculous. And the more you train, the more the education, the more efficient it becomes. And the more hands-on. It's like a lot like trimming. You can get a bunch of trimmers in the room, a bunch of guys, girls trimming, but some people have skill, and the more they practice trimming, the faster they get, the better they get, because they understand the process and they just have that hands-on experience. Hang harvesting is the same way. It's understanding branch lengths, understanding the way to hang it, understanding how to move the hangers, how to slide the hangers on the sticks, how to efficiently, smoothly, and with good form, use the system, to the maximum efficiency. And it's so efficient. And what's nice is you can use it 1,000 ways. Everybody has different SOPs. I've got crews that are hanging 4-foot plants. They have to hang 4-foot plants. That's all they're ever going to hang is 4-foot plants. That's fine. We've got SOPs for that. You want to hang broken down plants? We've got SOPs for that. We prefer to break plants down because to streamline the process, ultimately, if you're bucking your flower and you're going to buck it, you're going to trim it, somebody's got to take a branch and they've got to buck it, right? It's going to be a branch. They can't take a 4-foot plant in one hand and buck it with the other hand. It's not possible, right? So if you're breaking plants down, it's a lot easier to break plants down on the front end when they're wet and supple, right? Less trichomes flying in the air. It's easy to break plants down on the front end when they're wet and supple. Then they're all consolidated onto the hanger, the same length branches. And when you pick it up next out of the bin, it's ready to dry. It's ready to buck. So it really is. There's a whole system to streamlining the process that we prefer, that we know is viable, you know, and it does save money, it does save time. It's guaranteed. It's a no-brainer. But again, if you have your own SOPs, you can integrate those nicely with the hang harvesting system, guaranteed.
This episode is brought to you by FanGuards, or as we like to call them, finger savers. AirGlide from GrowGlide is the best-in-class in-rack airflow solution on the market, and it just got safer without the massive compromise to airflow velocity like other guards. If it was up to OSHA, grow rooms would be people-free, but in reality, they're not, and people's hair and fingers are precious. Don't let your employees get defoliated. Reach out to GrowGlide and get FanGuards today.
Yeah, I think all your product does, not all it does, but it streamlines the approach that you've already practiced. It elevates the game that you're already playing, reduces labor and touches along the process, right? For me, when I think about number one, harvesting, right? Like, okay, maybe I changed the way I fertigate in the last couple of days to reduce water content because I don't have the HVAC to keep up. Trimming, I've usually got a plan at the end of the sausage machine on how I'm going to do it. I'm not going to wet trim, I'm going to dry trim. But like you said, I need to bucket into the appropriate manageable sizes so I get the appropriate airflow and I have predictable, uniform, consistent drying along the process. Initial drying stage, right? Let's remove moisture until we get to that space where we can string it out and really make sure that we're getting the eaten potatoes that we want, right? Protecting the homogenization of secondary metabolites. Monitoring, and that one gets tricky too. You know, like, how do you access it? How do you monitor it? I think that's another way that you really help streamline, right? You can pinpoint particular places in the curing facility, in the larger facility, and understand, oh, here's my pinch point. Here's where I don't have airflow, versus just looking at a giant wall of weed and saying, I don't know, the top's probably drier than the bottom, but maybe it's not, you know?
Yeah. Looking at the list, I was just looking back at number 2 also, where it talks about, you know, trimming off excess water leaves, you know, before the initial drying phase. In my experience, you know, that's a better process when you're going to use all that trim for distillate or, you know, process it. But in my experience, you get a better flower when the water leaves are left on and kind of shrink up and dry around the bud as it dries. It gives that little bit of extra protection. Just aesthetically, it makes it a finer, a little bit prettier flower when you leave the water leaves on in that process.
Yeah, I think the distinction is sugar leaf or water leaf, right? Those big sun fan leaves, I'm taking those off because I don't want the extra moisture in the space to battle against. But you're right. All the leaves that hold that bud and protect those secondary metabolites are golden, because I know I'm going to bang it around a little bit. And that does allow me to hang it, to touch it until I finally get to that point where I'm cooking on my potato chips, right? I know that I've done everything to protect those secondary metabolites to that point. Versus if you remove those early on, dude, every single bump and bruise and smashing into each other is compromising the quality.
Yeah, I know. And it just happens, you know. At scale, you can't get around some of this stuff, you know. And if you're gonna process all that and you got 100,000 pounds, a lot of people just use a Trim Pro and knock all those fan leaves off on the way in. You know, it beats up your flour. Then again, back to selling potatoes, because you can't use a Trim Pro and just trash or, you know, get all the water leaf off without it, like, you know, it's so abusive on the flour, and it really speeds up and cleans up that tail end process. So, you know, I'm torn. I've used those. You got to use them. You know, all these tools that the industry has now, you know, trim machines, my God, they're so awesome. I mean, you couldn't hand trim 5,000 pounds. Like, that's not practical, you know, especially not $300 a pound. You know, it's not cost effective. So it's just amazing, all the tools we have now.
And I think something that your solution does too is it really frees up the time to effectively sort, right? Then I can say, these are the cherries I'm going to hand trim. These are the nuggets that I'm putting through the machine. And these are the ones that I'm blowing out for distillate or whatever it might be. But because I have that extra time and I'm able to see it, and I can make that decision quickly in the process versus taking down a whole sheet of cannabis and you have to sort of treat all of that the same when that SOP comes into play. You've given us the freedom to play with that a little bit.
Yeah. Burp. Let's see, number 7 here, burping drying. Yeah, that's great. I mean, again, that's all part of the art, you know, and we're not using jars. Guys are using, you know, 1,000 square foot dry rooms that they're going to burp, you know, so it's a different process. Again, it's just art to get that perfect consistency when it's ready to buck and trim. Again, per facility, is it gonna go through a dry trimmer, you know, or is it gonna be hand trimmed? So those considerations, if it's going through a dry trimmer, it might have to be just the right, you know, moisture to properly knock off the tips, but not trash it, or, you know, not be too wet that it doesn't even do anything, right? It's got to have just that, it's got to be just right. And that's an art. That's an art right there. Just getting it to the right, you know, it's one thing if you're hanging a pound, but when you've got 500 pounds hanging in the room, that's got to come down and you've got, you know, 50 trimmers waiting and et cetera, man, it's fine art.
And I think it's all part of the narrative, right? It's something you do as a facility, and these decisions you make that ultimately impact your brand and the consumer experience. And, you know, how does it affect the bottom line? Like, how does these decisions in drying and curing impact the price per pound that you get, right? Is it hand trimmed? Is it machine trimmed? Did you dry it over a short period of time or a long period of time? How does that affect shelf life? Looks like we stumped the Growbot here. Doesn't want to talk to us about.
Price per pound. Doesn't want to talk about.
Let's go again. Let's start. This is the first time this has happened.
This is great. It's a great stump.
Yeah.
How does it affect quality, right? That's what we're talking about, selling potatoes or drying potatoes. And Jay and I can speak to that in the same form of like, these are the decisions you make during facility design. Whether or not you invest in a solution for your curing space will ultimately dictate what your brand is seen as in the market and what kind of chips you make in the end, right? Like, I think, like you said, Jay, there's a lot of art to it, but that art is often dictated by your willingness to invest finances in the first place to be able to give you the easel and the canvas and the paints to be able to make good art, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, drying's one of the most overlooked, you know, aspects of the process. I think most people don't really consider the drying process, you know, until recently, it's been a race just to harvest. And if you can make it, you know, and you don't get robbed and the feds don't get it and it doesn't mold and rot, then you'll worry about, you know, where you're going to dry it, how you're going to dry it, right? Now, everybody's making it to harvest all the time. It's all legit. Everything's above board. So we know we're going to knock down X amount, you know, and the most important aspect in my mind these days, obviously, is what I do, is drying, right? It's people don't appreciate what it is, you know, they don't understand the process. If you're a grower, then you know drying is a shit show. Like, it just is. I don't care what level you're operating. If you're knocking down, as joyful and amazing and wonderful it is as it is to harvest, because it's, you know, all your hard work, it's coming to fruition, you're going to knock down, and it's, you know, it's a joyful time. It's often very stressful because of the way
it's chaos, right? It's any way you frame it, it's
got labor, and you've got to, you know, you've got to direct that labor. And because of the nature of the harvest and the different moving parts of where the room is and how many people you have and how many pairs of scissors you have and how many totes you have and all these considerations, it can be a little stressful to properly delegate those, you know, that workflow, right? And so when we set people up with a hang harvesting system, we've essentially laid out for them the process. Now, it's semantics, the small nuances that they're gonna, you know, in between, you know, going from their grow room into the, you know, to the harvest rack, et cetera. But essentially, once we have them dialed in, it's so smooth that it's so straightforward. It makes it very understandable, and everybody has purpose and understands what to do. So the stress is just like way down, the joy is way up, and it creates a consistent harvest. Like, it's just always consistent, always the same. People know what to do. It's straightforward. They cut it, they hang it right here, not on a ladder, none of this bullshit, right? It's just super safe and effective and functional. So
it's predictable. People are confident. And in a lot of ways, this is the kind of job security, job creation, career elevation that we're creating. This is the way to do it. Learn this process, execute these tasks, and you'll be successful versus, let's be honest, I don't know what I'm doing. Just hang some shit and blow some air on it. We're beyond that now, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Right.
It's not, we're not just throwing
Mhm.
shit at the wall anymore. Like, we want to know how much we're knocking down, how much we're putting in there, how much it's going to dry, how much space we need, how much space we need to store the totes, right? Everything, the whole process. Like, what does that look like?
The cleaning
You know,
process of those totes, the
all
cleaning
that.
process of your hangers, the cleaning process of the scissors, right? It's all
Everything
important.
should be knowable, understandable, straightforward, simple. Doesn't have to be
Yeah.
a shit show.
Jay, what do you think the biggest mistake people make when they go through the curing process, whether it's in facility design or process implementation or whatever it is? I know you've seen a lot, man, and I know we've both seen a lot of failure along the way.
I mean, the biggest mistake is not knowing better and using net or trellis or anything else like that. Like, I hate to say, it's true though. That is the biggest mistake. It's the process. You're damaging your flower in a multitude of ways. You know, like I said, going into totes for too long, too much weight in the tote, going in and off, up and down off nets. I mean, there's so many. You know, the most harmful is probably nets. You know, hate to say it. I mean, don't even get me going like at the environmental aspect. I mean, you're using all this net, just gets trashed and thrown away and whatever. I mean, you know, to each their own, but it's wasteful, it's consumptuous, it's cheap on the front end, expensive in labor and expensive on the environment. It takes a toll. So yeah, you know, what's the biggest screw up? What's the biggest fallacy? What's the worst thing I see? It's hard to say, man. I've seen a lot of seen a lot. What's most common is net, and even though it's the most common, it's also the most harmful. It's like the worst process. It seems great. You can get all this weed up there. Great. It's cheap to set up. Great.
It's cheap.
Everything else about it is expensive. The labor, the cost on your product, the cost on the environment, like on and on and on. You know, it's just so it comes down to just like not knowing better, ignorance. You know, they don't know better. And, you know, that's it. So when you know better, you do better. You know,
And as the game evolves, right?
That's right.
It's about using the tools and using the technological advances like people like you are bringing to the space. And then the scientist says, well, we need to use a water activity meter. And I'm on board with that, right? Like we need to know what's going on with these buds and the cannabis isotherm and what's going on in the curing process with enzymes and Browning reaction, all these things. But measuring it can be a challenge and interpreting it can be a challenge. The biggest challenge for me with net is accessing it, right? I know I can get on a forklift or I can potentially offlift some of your bigger pods and bring them down. I can get that stuff that's 20 feet in the air, man, and I can actually collect data from it. And maybe I don't do that every time. I just do it for the first couple of runs so I can solidify the SOPs. What the hell am I going to do with the net? Bring the whole thing down? Get out of here, man. Now I'm strapping in on the forklift and trying to have me lift up there. And I'm using some little scissor pinchers. I'm ruining product, trying to snap stuff off, watching it bounce off the ground in order to get a sample. Like, again, that's their problem, you know?
You know, it's a fine art. Again, comes back to it's dry rooms are an art. It's an art form, and managing the dry room is a even bigger art, right? So, you know, that's what we do. We set up dry rooms. We dial in the space, and then we talk to you about the HVAC and other considerations as well, right?
Yeah. How often do you see when you start talking to these facilities that you find yourself talking to someone whose specific job is running the curing room, right? I know oftentimes you're talking to CEOs, CFOs, engineers, cultivators who then double as the person that's also doing the curing. I feel like if you got a real facility, you got veg, you got clone, you got mom, you got flower, multiple rooms. You really need a specialist that's focused on that post-process and curing specifically. How often do you find that person in these facilities where you're like, oh, I'm talking to the guy or the girl that this is their expertise and they're going to really make an informed decision on investing in a hang harvesting system?
Yeah, that's a good question. Very rarely is there someone that specializes in it. If they do, it's, you know, these guys doing white labeling for big brands, like big build outs, big facilities. And often though that's their task and that's their job, they don't know what's proper. So, you know, just because that's their job and that's their specialty, they've been hired, but largely they're sorting it out. You know, somebody's got to do the job. They're the one in the job. So, you know, mostly that's what I see. I don't see a lot of specialists in the space. I deal with a lot of owners direct that are either owner / grower. They manage the whole facility and every aspect of it. That's probably most common, is like an owner grower. They own it and they're the head grower and they delegate all the tasks. And then they may or may not be the money guy that actually is going to, purchase it. But most often it's the grower that reaches out. Those are the most common people that reach out, are growers that are already using net and they see what we're doing and lights go off. They get it, right? They already know, they get it. Owners, if they're not growers, maybe they get it. Maybe, the specialists, maybe they see it. They see some aspects of it, but what I run into often is, on the contrary, is often I'll see owners that love it and they look at it like, oh my God, this is great. They don't even know anything about the weed business, but they see the efficiency, like some of the obvious things, like, oh, this is great. They go to their grower and the grower is so hung up on his ego. He's like, I'm already doing it my way. He's already on the net. I want to fucking see it. You want to see it. Right. It's crazy. I run into that all the time, so it's like, but more often than not, I don't fight against the current. I wait for people that understand it, that are interested. They come to me, we hook them up, they love it, they come back and get more, and that's how it goes. And people that don't know and aren't interested, I don't want to fight. I'm not going to struggle.
Right.
No need.
I think
this is industry standard. This is industry standard equipment, and when you use it, you already know. Until you use it, you only know what you see or what you grasp from what you're seeing, and everybody's going to see different things. So they're going to get what they get. They're going to understand what they understand. But there's a million nuances with the hang harvesting system, in the way it functions, in the way it stores, in the way it cleans, in the way it uses with metrics, that it's hard to grasp how epic the system is until you're hands-on, truly. So
right. And I'm with you. Like, I feel like every CEO or owner that's not also a cultivator, doesn't come from the industry, should put on a pair of gloves and trim some weed. They should smoke their own product. They should take some pride in that, because then that really puts into perspective what it takes to cut clones, to manage moms, to spray IPM, to harvest product. And then stuff sits on their shelf in their house for a certain amount of time. And they start to realize, I need to invest in the curing system and the SOPs so I can do things like number 5, increase the shelf life. That number 6, I can have a better brand that people are more receptive to, right? That I can be more proud of my product. Every time I talk to an owner that's like, I don't smoke weed, I never will, I'm always like, this is going to be an uphill battle in you surviving the market compression. Because you're not going to know why. You'll never know the why of investing in it.
They're trying to hire people and put everybody into place, but not really fully understand themselves. I'm blessed that I come from the space. I've grown a ton of different environments and different scales, and dried a 1,000 harvests, whatever, just so much and I fucked up so many times to understand the process. But that's what's gained me all the information. That's what's gained me all the knowledge was, well, fuck, that didn't work. How many times did I do that? And that's what's gotten me here, is just that just deep desire for the dank, smoking the dank. I want the dank. I'm first and foremost, I'm a smoker, first and foremost, I wouldn't be talking to you right now if I didn't smoke weed.
This episode is brought to you by Dry Flower, the original hang harvesting system. Whether using their complete hang harvesting kits or creating your own custom build with their hangers and hardware, your curing space is about to get a major upgrade. Dry Flower's purpose-built solutions are the most efficient way to utilize space, optimize airflow, and increase efficiency. Do yourself and your customers a favor and get a proper drying solution today at dryflower.com. Dry Flower, get a handle on your harvest.
It all started with that first, bong hit, and then fuck, let's go in on a bag. And then, man, if I get my own bag, I can sell him a bag. And then next thing you know, there's fucking truckloads going down the road with, bales in it. And it's all really just because I want to smoke weed, and I'm just trying to finance my habit and live well and be happy. You know what I'm saying? So, through that pursuit of wanting the dank, growing it, fucking growing garbage, and then growing dank, and then ruining it in the dry process, and understanding that all so that I can smoke the best stuff, not for the market, not for them, just for myself, right? That's where this all started. I want to smoke the best shit, like, period. So that's what's gotten me here, and if you don't smoke weed and you don't understand the process, how are you gonna understand what you need and why you need it? And that's why I have what I have, because I understand the process. I understand all the pinch points, all the pain points of the shit show. And so this system truly overcomes all the pinch points because of its functionality and its customization, like the ability to customize every location so that they have exactly what they need to streamline the process and save time and money. And
can you speak to that real quick, man? Like, I think that, one of the reasons you continued to iterate and develop the solution you have is that it's also for the homies, right? That hook you up with a little bit of weed here and there. And you're like, you want to give them advice. You want to give them the best solution. And I've seen you turn storage units and storage containers into curing spaces, barns, indoor buildings, all these different things. Yep. Applying that same core competency, tweaking the solutions you have to make them fit into the space. I'd love for you to just talk to that, because I know every time you come to a new facility, you come with open eyes and open ears, and you're saying, hey, here's my advice from 30 years of doing this. Let me tell you what I think. Right before you're trying to sell them anything, it's like, totally. Let me give you my perspective real quick on what I think your pinch points are. And then the homie goes, yeah, those are my pinch points. Let's solve them.
For sure, man. Because it's all about customization. So when I talk to a grower, I'm trying to just make friends, right? So that I can understand what they're doing. Like, how much are you growing? Where are you growing it? What's your process? What are you doing? And in that beta, in that knowledge, now I become them. I'm like, fuck, okay, here's what I'm doing. I'm that guy. What am I doing? Here's what I'm doing. And I can kind of live that process and to understand, well, if I'm that guy, I have a whole tool bag of brackets and parts and accessories that, like, largely aren't even seen on the website. I got shit that people don't even know. And so I use those things when I'm like, okay, well, this guy needs that one thing. And I don't showcase it on the website, because if somebody sees it, they're going to be like, what the hell is that? They won't understand it. It's just too much, right? So every space is customizable. If I go and see that they've got 10 shipping containers, well, I designed the turnkey shipping container conversion kit that literally hangs in a shipping container in like 5 minutes. Hangs in 5 minutes without tools. Super custom. And if you've ever dried in a shipping container, shipping containers they're tried and true. If you're on the West Coast, that's what everybody used to do, because you can drop a shipping container in the woods, you can lock it up, it's a turnkey storage spot, but there's nothing to build off because they're metal. They're all metal walls, metal ceiling. So for instance, we have a system that literally hangs on the hooks in the container, assembles with just some push pins, and it's ready to go in a few minutes. And that's perfect for somebody that has containers. If you don't have a container, I would never suggest that to you, ever, because that's probably not the right solution for a number of different reasons, right? So what we really like to do is customize any space you have. If you've got Husky racks, if you've got Grow Glide racks, we've got a great Grow Glide adaptation. Oh my God, the Grow Glide rack is so baller because you're essentially using the Grow Glide racks and doubling the footprint of that rack, right? So not only are you able to put this rack in it and install immediately, right? The install is so quick, you're doubling the footprint of that rack. So without a pin, like a presentation to show you exactly what that looks like, I'm at a loss, but the efficiency of like the Grow Glide adaptation, next level. But if you're in a barn and you got a dirt floor, that ain't it, right? You're going to need some 2x4 posts maybe, right? So it again, all depends on what you're doing, what your SOPs are, what your expectations are, and then what's your budget, right? The key is the functionality of the system. It's the J hanger, the Pro hanger that allow you to cut and load the hanger as close to the crop as possible. But if you're on a budget, we might need to run your whole system with 2x4s and 1x2 wooden sticks to just get that cost way down. So you can get the same function, but at a fraction of the cost because you're going lumber. It's not going to last. It's not going to support the weight that you're going to get using metal, but it will work, essentially the same. So, that's really what we do is customization of, becoming the grower and dialing them in proper with exactly what they need.
I think your customization is important, but what you just said, right? Like dialing them in proper. The first time I met you, I rolled to Santa Rosa and you were sweaty, you were dripping, you were working. And I was like,
yeah,
bro, like, are you an owner? And you're like, no, I got to show them how to do it. Right. I've supplied this solution and the team needs a quick education. Let me bang it out for them. This is how you do it. To me, that was a whole nother level where it's like, not only are you creating a customized solution, solving a lot of problems in pinch points, but you're actually executing it in front of them to show people how to best utilize the tool. And to me, that was like, oh, dude, this is why you need this guy. It's not just the sales, it's solutions oriented. I want the eating potatoes,
It's the full customer support, man, because I believe in what I do. I understand what I'm doing. And when I can go on site, especially, I can't go everywhere because there's just too many and there's, so I try to hit the larger scale set, the larger scale operations. But when I can go there and train their people for just an afternoon, their efficiency goes through the roof because of all these nuances that I was mentioning, right? From moving the hangers around to consolidating hangers to loading hangers to, there's too much to speak on. But when I can get on site and really train people, that's my jam. That's when, it's like everybody's high-fiving all day, because they just need that little bit of education. This is a brand new system, not for me, but for someone maybe it's their first day. They've never seen it. They're like, what the hell is this? You got these metal hangers. What's going on here? They don't even see, they don't get it. So just an afternoon of explaining, of hands-on hanging, cutting, showing where to appropriately cut branches, what length branch for their SOPs, just training them on their own SOPs. At the end of that, it's high fives and good vibes, and that's what I'm trying to create. It's like, I want an epic product that speaks for itself. And then I want to come in, with high fives and like good vibes on top of it. Right. So it's
and you get the high fives in the moment, but Jay, you get the high fives weeks later, right? When people are seeing the end results, right? They're having more potent harvest. Their THC COAs are going up. Their secondary metabolites like terpenes, they're capturing more. Their product is simply better, whether that's due to less touches or better airflow. The point is that you solved a lot of problems that created a better smoke for the customers. You reduce risks, you increase financial performance. You did everything that they were trying to achieve that they didn't know something so simple, no offense, could solve. But it's just like,
absolutely. You're nailing it. And the best compliment is that second order. When they come back for just a little bit more, and they do, it's like an erector set, it's like Legos. It's like when you get that Lego set and you build it and then you like put it to the side and you get another set and those all go into like the basket of Legos. And you just keep adding to these Lego basket because they're all interchangeable. They work together. You just keep adding, I need a little bit more of this over there. And it all works together. It's just, it's so easy to keep scaling up and adding a little bit, just a little bit more, you don't have to throw out anything, just a little bit more. Once your hands on, it's so understandable. I don't have to school them after they have it and they're using it. I don't need to sell them their second order. Now they understand it, they're using it, and they come back and they say, I need 5 of these, 10 of those, and 100 of those. And that's it. It's done. They've been educated. They're using it.
That's our favorite customer too.
Yeah.
The one that's like, hey, I want you for phase 2. I'm building it out now. Or, hey, I want to add a second tier. Let's rock and roll. They're not considering another provider. They understand the value proposition, the partnership, the solutions that you bring, the advice, the site visit, the hanging out and talking shop, all the little things that go into being successful in this industry beyond just selling pieces of metal.
Yeah,
right?
That's right. Yeah, I'm all about the relationships, man. I'm about building relationships and knowing growers, understanding what they're doing, getting them set up right, and ultimately so that when my name comes up, they're happy. They're like, oh, Jay, oh yeah, he set me proper. Hell yeah, he hooked me up, and I got another room coming. He's gonna build my next room too. I love that. That's great for me. That feels so good to level people up and make them feel good and get benefit from like what I'm providing. Best feeling ever.
You look everybody in the eye at MJ Biz and it's all smiles and hugs. And
yes, everybody wins.
No hate.
I have no bad reviews, knock on wood. It's good vibes all the way around. That's where I'm building this brand. I haven't even really gotten to I haven't even got to bring in the yoga and the health side of it yet, too much. I throw some yoga stuff on my feed every now and then, some postures and, yogi tip of the day, whatever. But, the lifestyle, weed and yoga and family, that's what's up,
It's all
joy.
genuine, man. It comes
Yeah.
across genuine. It's all genuine. And I think that's where, you're allowed to fail. We all make mistakes in the
Oh, yeah.
space. It's
Yeah.
what happens when you make a mistake. How do you solve the problem? How do you make sure you don't make that mistake again? And to me, that's the relationship and the partnership, right? To a certain extent, we're learning together. It's not a science experiment. It's a business. We got to make money. But as long as we own up to
That's
it
right.
and fix it the next time, it's all good, man.
Man, transparency, honesty, those things feel so good. Being transparent is one of the best feelings in the world because you don't have to remember what you said. You're always transparent. You're always honest. You never got to remember. If you're always transparent and honest, you can say whatever the fuck you want because it's always genuine, and it's never going to contradict what you said before because you're always honest and you don't have to consider it. You don't have to question it. And that's just a great feeling, man. Integrity. Nothing feels better than integrity. Dude, it feels so good to be in
Something to be
integrity.
proud of.
Like, you ever get caught in a
Hey,
lie
Jay.
when you're a kid? Like how horrible does that feel? Who
No,
like,
man.
like some people still learning that lesson again and again and again and again, Thank God I learned that
Totally.
lesson. I'm learning other
Yeah, and
lessons.
for me,
still.
instead of just trying to sell shitty weed, like I just learned how to grow better weed so I could look people in the eye and be like, this is really good weed, right? Like that's part of the game. Game
Fair
yourself
enough,
up so
yeah.
you don't have to mislead
enough.
people. Hey Jay, dude, we just hit the hour, man. This flew
man.
by. I appreciate you so much. Like
for
homie to
bro.
homie,
Nice.
dude, I appreciate what you do for the game. Like mad respect. I
Thank
think
you.
you've gamed up a lot of people on curing. You solve a problem in a niche market that people don't fully understand, whether it's the cultivator, the scientist, the post-process engineer, the trimmer that got elevated to managing curing. Like you really do empower people to understand the SOPs necessary to consistently develop a brand and have financial success while reducing risk. From an HVAC and facility design perspective, I love that you're helping people do the math on what they need from a mechanical solutions perspective, what they can fit so they can put together predictable systems in place to be successful, man. So props on what you do, brother. We love your product.
Thank
We
you,
love the
Jesse.
collab, man. It's great.
Yeah, thanks guys. I appreciate you having me on. It's great to talk to you and talk shop for sure. I look forward
Always,
to seeing you again.